Greetings, everyone. My name is Sarah Barnes, and on behalf of Campbell Company, I'd like to welcome you to the California Giving Trends in conjunction with the release of Giving USA webinar. Today, we are live with our California team, and we're especially excited to have three special guests with us today, Lauren Asdahl, Lisa Barr, and Joe Komsky. Welcome, everyone. But before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. So first, close any programs that are running on your computer. Call in using a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. You can move away your cell phone from your computer. And if you experience any visual issues, send a chat to Campbell Company. You may also contact GoToWebinar at 1-800-263-6317. Finally, today's webinar will last around 90 minutes and you will earn 1.5 continuing education credits, and that is good for certification with CFRE International. About an hour after the webinar, you will receive an email that includes a web address to download your certificate, as well as information on how to sign up for our next webinar. Because the first few slides are a product of the Giving Institute, we are not able to post or send out today's presentation. We welcome questions during the webinar, and if you are willing to be unmuted, we will ask your question live. Please send your questions in advance by using the question pane to your right. And make sure to follow us on social media using hashtag GivingUSA2017. We'll be actively posting throughout this week. And now I'd like to quickly introduce Craig Hightower and Tom Wilson. Craig is a Vice President and Director, Western Region at Campbell Company. He has partnered with many organizations on the West and Northwest Coast to help them increase their philanthropic potential. And Tom Wilson is a Vice President at Campbell Company, and he serves nonprofits along the West, Northwest Coast, and in Canada. He helps clients understand that creating a culture of philanthropy throughout the organization, not just in the fundraising office, can inspire donors to new heights of giving. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Craig. Craig?
Thanks, Sarah. As many of you know, last Tuesday, the Giving USA Foundation released its philanthropic data for 2016. This data is researched by Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. It's the longest running annual report on U.S. charitable giving. But for today, our primary focus is going to be on California. Since California is the largest philanthropic market in the country, we felt it would be particularly helpful to relate the Giving USA data against what we're experiencing here in California. So we brought in a panel of experts to help us interpret some of this data and share their personal experiences. But basically our agenda will include a brief overview of the Giving USA data that was released on Tuesday. We will then share some California-specific research, and then we're going to ask our panelists to react to this data and to share their insights. So on our panel, being joined us today is first Lauren Asdahl. She's currently the Deputy Chief Advancement Officer of Major Gifts at the Sierra Club. Before joining the Sierra Club, she served as Director of Development for Mother Jones, and thanks for joining us today, Lauren. Lisa Barr is the Senior Development Officer at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, which is one of the most generous foundations in the country. Prior to joining the foundation, she served as Executive Director for the Longwood Symphony Orchestra. Welcome, Lisa. And then finally, Joe Komsky. Joe is Associate Vice President of Clinical Major Gifts at the City of Hope's Comprehensive Cancer Center. And before joining the City of Hope, he was Director of Development for Los Angeles Conservancy. Welcome, Joe. So to get us started, I'm going to send this over to Tom so he can share an overview of the data that was released on Tuesday. Tom?
Thanks a lot, Craig. And we're showing you the real highlights of these Giving USA slides. There's many more than this, but we wanted to keep the highlights and then move into California much more deeply. So this first slide you're seeing is total giving. We're at $390 billion, and that's now the highest since the recession. So we're bouncing back. It's a 2.7% increase over last year. If you read the Chronicle Philanthropy yesterday, they called it a 1.4% because they're doing it after inflation. But either way, it's still somewhat modest, but in a positive direction, which is really good news. This next slide is one that when I'm working with clients, I make sure all the board members see, everybody understands, and you're probably going to have your own charts, and we'll hear that from our panelists today. But in many ways, the distribution of sources of money are somewhat pretty stable. Individuals at 72%, That's very stable. Corporations at 5%. It's been at 5% for many, many years. And as a reminder, that counts in-kind donations. So food banks, software from Microsoft, hardware. Bequests are 8%. They're down slightly, but this is a very volatile area because if you get one large big bequest, we had one at $2 billion a couple of years ago, that changes these numbers drastically. And then foundations at 15%, and that's up a bit. And it's very interesting. We have Lisa from Silicon Valley Community Foundation because they are the recipient of donor gifts to foundations. So she appears in this slide, but then also this next slide. So this is where recipient types of organizations. So you can see religion is still leading at 32%, although we did a trend 20 years ago, and it was significantly higher. So this area is coming down a bit, and others are more robust. Education second. Human services at 12%. Gifts to grant-making foundations, this is where Silicon Valley gets money, is at 10%. Health with Joe is at 8%. Public society benefit. Some of the Fidelity was just named this morning, and Giving in Chronicle of Philanthropy is the #1 charity out of the top 400. They're in the public society benefit. These donor advice funds through these Fidelity and Charles Schwab. And then environment animals at 3%. And that's where we have Lauren. And again, that sector is growing the most of all of these sectors. So it's small, but very, very robust. And you'll hear about that in a minute. The other slide, as I looked through the deck, was number of volunteers. Was quite fascinating. Now, it's somewhat static over time. They didn't break this out by age range, which would be a little more fascinating. They did note that 7.9 billion hours were donated last year. And then, in fact, that represents $184 billion of money. So it's pretty significant. They also tracked volunteer giving versus non-volunteer giving. They noted volunteers give at about 78% rate, where non-volunteers give about 40%. And I think intuitively, we all know that, but it's fun to see real data on this. And with that, Craig, let's turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Tom. Simultaneous to the release of the Giving USA data, Campbell Company published a 30-page report, which you all are able to download. It was on the state of philanthropy in post-recession California. This is kind of a compilation of numerous data sources that have been released in the past several years, but it also gives an interesting overview of what has been going on in the philanthropic sector up and down our state. I'm going to share a few highlights of this with you, and then we're going to open it up to our panel for conversation. But one of them, to get started, one of the most impressive headlines that came out of this research is actually on the next slide. You know, we've all known that California is an economic engine, so to many of us, it's not surprising that California is now the 6th largest economy in the world. And interestingly, earlier this month, the New York Times ran an article that talked about how for the last 80 consecutive months, there's been job growth in the U.S., and California has basically led the way in that area. Over the past 5 years, California has outperformed the country against just about every single important economic indicator. For instance, and California represents 12% of the population, but California has actually accounted for 17% of the U.S. job growth. And driving these numbers is what some people refer to as the 3 T's: technology, trade, and tourism. So for example, they talked about the boom in both San Francisco and Silicon Valley, which we're all aware of. They talked about the increased container traffic that's going through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And then they even talked about cable channels like Netflix and Amazon that have now ramped up their original programming, and how that is now driving job growth. But, you know, as we were reading all of this economic growth, what was surprising to me was the level of philanthropic support being generated by California residents. You know, I've always kind of thought of philanthropy in California as being a bit underdeveloped, but most of the data doesn't actually support that opinion. For instance, in 2012, the Chronicle Philanthropy issued a report that found individuals in California had contributed about $25 billion. And that's $9 billion more than the next closest states, which were New York and Texas. They had each contributed about $16 billion. And in fact, California, in that year, California accounted for 11% of all individual giving that was reported by Giving Institute that year. So in total, California's nonprofit sector represents about $208 billion in annual revenues and accounts for about 1/6 of the state's GDP, and that's about 15%. We also have some of the most generous foundations in the country. The chart you're looking at represents 10 of the most generous foundations in 2014. Our state has nearly 8,000 foundations. They granted a little over $8 billion in 2014, and that represented 14% of all U.S. foundation giving that year. And we also were home to the second most generous foundation in the United States that year, and that was the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Fortunately, we have a representative of the foundation with us on the panel today. When we look at income disparity, you know, despite all this great news about the economic prosperity, there's significant economic disparity up and down the state. Over the last 33 years, income inequality has grown about 18%. And while our state's poverty rate tracks just about equally to the United States as a whole, if you factor in the cost of living, California's poverty rate actually becomes the highest in the nation. So, Tom, could you go to the next slide?
There we go.
So, you know, despite California being a leader in charitable giving, so when you look at charitable giving as a percentage of adjusted gross income, it's just about even, so with other states around the country. So the top part of this graph that you're looking at represents California giving. The bottom half represents all other states. So as you can see, it's pretty much comparable. Mostly influencing these numbers is the economic disparity up and down the state. So particularly in California's rural versus urban areas. So this disparity not only influences who is able to give, but it also influences how much they can afford to give. So looking at it another way, when we compare the 10 most populous states in the country, California ranked 6th among the median contribution given by an individual. That median gift was about $2,800, which is compared to Texas is about 65% higher than Texas. And there's also a disparity between Northern and Southern California. I know this chart's a lot of detail to absorb, but basically the takeaway would be the revenue per capita by Bay Area nonprofits was nearly 3 times that of Southern California counterparts. So looking at the Bay Area, there are a couple of things we should note. First, the Bay Area includes 7 of the 10 wealthiest counties in California. Secondly, contributions have consistently increased from all sources since the recession. We see that especially among giving by individuals. Santa Clara County specifically led the way with $2.6 billion in contributions, and then San Francisco led the way as a percentage of adjusted gross income given to charity. With regard to foundation giving, the Bay Area has about 2,600 foundations. They have assets of over $61 billion and a total giving of about $5 billion. But we should also point out the Bay Area foundations had returned to positive growth by about 2013 following the decline that was caused by the recession. When we look at Los Angeles, moving down the state a little bit, Los Angeles is the largest county in California. It's home to roughly 1/4 of the state's population. Los Angeles also ranks 2nd to the Bay Area in terms of the size of its philanthropic market. Like the Bay Area, foundations play a key role in philanthropic giving. In Los Angeles, there's 2,500 foundations with assets of about $46 billion and giving of about $2 billion. They're also home to the foundation with the largest total assets in the state, and that's the J. Paul Getty Trust. However, the Great Recession had a huge impact on Los Angeles charities. It was kind of a double-edged sword. It caused an increase in the demand for service, and then it was coupled with a greater reliance on philanthropic support. As a percentage of adjusted gross income, Los Angeles residents gave similar amounts to what they did in the Bay Area. However, a report came out a couple of years ago by UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, and the report was called The Generosity Gap, donating less in post-recession Los Angeles County, what they found was that LA residents gave $1 billion less to nonprofits post-recession than they did before the recession. And then when we look at San Diego, San Diego's weathered the effects of the recession much better than Los Angeles. They've now returned to a period of relative philanthropic stability. However, San Diego's nonprofits rely on contributions for a higher proportion of their revenues than nonprofits in the rest of the state. So as an example, 27% of nonprofit revenue in San Diego is contributed. That translates to roughly $4 billion per year. And of that total, roughly $2 billion is contributed by individuals. And then to top it off, San Diego residents are slightly less generous as a percentage of AGI than Los Angeles and the Bay Area counterparts. And then this past Tuesday, actually, Charity Navigator came out with ranking San Diego actually #1 in terms of overall financial health, accountability, and transparency of its nonprofit sector. So that does it for the fast facts. I'm now going to turn it back over to Tom to tee up a conversation with our panelists.
Great, thanks, Greg. So I want to have each person, react to this comments. What's your general feeling of this? And we had a good rehearsal last week. So Lauren, let's start with you. Lauren, are you there?
I think Lauren,
we may be.
I think she might be self-muted. I'm seeing.
Oh, okay.
On the
Lisa, let's jump to you. Let's jump to you, Lisa, as she's getting set here.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Well, let me start, if I can, by just giving a little bit of a brief overview of Silicon Valley Community Foundation and my work here at the organization. I'm a senior development officer, which makes me a member of our development team. We think of our development team as kind of the front door of the organization. I'm working with new individual and family donors, new relationships with corporate clients, as well as new relationships with other nonprofits or other foundation clients. And so we're working with donors and clients here in the Bay Area, but also across the country and around the world. We have over 2,000 donor funds, including donor-advised funds, and we also offer back office support and other philanthropic project support through an offering we refer to as customized philanthropy services. Here in Silicon Valley, as you might guess, many of our donors are entrepreneurs, and they approach their philanthropy in an entrepreneurial way. That could mean gifting complex assets like pre-IPO stock or virtual currency. It could mean establishing less traditional philanthropic vehicles. And they also tend to approach their grant making in creative ways, often with a focus on impact investing. So as a community foundation, of course, donor-advised funds are our bread and butter, but we're unique in that we consider ourselves to be really vehicle agnostic, where we are able to sponsor supporting organizations, to provide support for private foundations, taking on their back office activities. So we really want to meet donors where they are and enable their philanthropy in whatever way makes the most sense for them. And just a quick history lesson, we are the product of a merger of two community foundations which happened back in 2007. So each of those foundations had 50-year histories each, but we are this year celebrating our 10th anniversary as Silicon Valley Community Foundation. In those 10 years, we've seen a really tremendous growth in our assets under management from about $1.3 billion in 2007 to $8.2 billion today. We have a community endowment fund here. Our discretionary dollars are an endowment of about $200 million that spins out $8 to $10 million annually to support local organizations around a few specific strategic areas, including education, immigration, economic security, and housing and transportation issues. As I said, this year we're celebrating our 10th anniversary and doing a little digging on the numbers of what we've been able to accomplish over these 10 years. We have made grants totaling $2.3 billion in California over those 10 years. $1.6 billion went to charities outside of California, and over $127 million to international organizations. So it was really fascinating to dig into some of these California numbers. I also took part in, or I took part as a participant in Tuesday's panel on the full Giving USA report. And one of the speakers on Tuesday mentioned the shift in individual giving into donor-advised funds. So those numbers are now showing up in the foundation slice of the pie rather than the individual slice of the pie. And we've certainly, I think, contributed to that growth and have been working to assist with that growth. In 2016, we raised about $1.4 billion to our current funds and to establish new funds. Year over year for the past 10 years of our history, we're adding around 150 new funds each year. So with that, I'll take a breath and throw it back to Tom and Craig.
Excellent, very helpful. Joe, what about your view from Southern California?
Sure. Well, City of Hope is a comprehensive, one of 48 comprehensive cancer centers in the country. We are located in Duarte, California, so about 15, 20 miles east of Los Angeles. City of Hope has a long history. We started in 1913 as a tuberculosis sanatorium and has always been proud of our culture of philanthropy. I mean, literally back in the 1910s and 20s and 30s, people were bringing carloads of soil and trees and plants out here to plant them. As we have moved into the present and the future, obviously philanthropy has taken on a very different aspect. We've had a strong history, though. We have a unique model at City of Hope in terms of our fundraising. We certainly have a lot of individual support, foundation support, corporate support. The corporate support in particular, we have a very large industry support system that goes back probably 60 years. And it's industries from all around the country. So, for example, we have a hardware and home improvement industry that includes Home Depot and Lowe's and Orchard Supply Hardware, as well as suppliers and things like that to those industries. That probably contributes $5 to $6 million a year to what we're doing at City of Hope. Now the other large aspect of that then is the Grateful Patient fundraising, and that's where me and my team work. People who are patients at the hospital obviously are very grateful for the care they receive. Their families are grateful for the care that they receive. So we do a lot of our fundraising there as well. I mean, in terms of looking at this data, I think City of Hope, I feel like that what we're seeing presently is the coming out of that recession and going back to the charitable giving, because that's what we're seeing at City of Hope on a personal basis, and I think we're going to get deeper into our numbers later. But for example, between 2015 and 2016, City of Hope saw 14% growth in our fundraising. I think some of that has to do with new leadership at City of Hope in philanthropy and sort of building a new culture of philanthropy where we are focused on larger gifts and a broader swath of people that we're reaching out to. So I would turn it back over to you guys with that.
Hey, Lauren, how about you?
I'm here. Sorry about that double mute snafu. So Sierra Club's celebrating its 125th anniversary this year as the nation's leading grassroots environmental organization. We have over 3.2 million members and supporters nationwide, and 64 chapters and nearly 400 volunteer groups in all 50 states. But California is really kind of our central location. So 13 of those 64 chapters are here in California. Our national headquarters is here in Oakland, California. So we do a lot of activity in California, and it's where we see the largest numbers of both members and donors per state. As Director of Major Gifts, I oversee a department of 20 folks, which include major gift officers, grant writers, chapter fundraising support, communication staff, and technology staff. And we've really seen Sierra Club revenues been on an upward trajectory since the recession. We've been raising more and more money to accomplish our mission, and much of this increase has really been focused around our efforts to fight climate change and accelerate a transition toward a clean energy economy. So last year we closed 2016 with revenues both in C3 charitable contributions and C4 contributions, because Sierra Club itself is a C4 of just shy of $110 million. I think that the data both in the Giving USA report as well as the kind of analysis that Campbell Company has done in California tracks really well with what we're experiencing. We're certainly seeing more folks giving to environmental causes and focusing on the environment as part of their philanthropy, again with I think a majority of that focus centering around climate change issues. We've fared slightly better than the 7.2% increase that we saw from 2015 to 2016 that's reflected in the Giving USA report. Major gifts, in fact, for Sierra Club were up about 8%, whereas our membership and low-dollar fundraising was up 21.5% in that same time period, so pretty significant growth for us. And then, you know, when I came to Sierra Club, the organization had sort of an institutional culture of reliance on foundation fundraising, and so I've actually been working and kind of using as part of my toolkit the data in these reports to push the organization towards more aggressive fundraising for individuals. As we know, individuals give the lion's share of philanthropic dollars in the country, and Sierra Club is unique in the sense that we have such a large member and donor database, so there's a lot of wealth to unlock in our file.
Excellent, very good. Now I want each of you to reflect deeper on your sector of the data. So Lisa, let's go back to you with Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So I'm hearing more robust growth from each of you than the national statistics. So Giving USA said foundations grew 3%. You might reflect on how you've grown. You mentioned the 1.4 billion increase, but tell us more about where you're seeing increases. Lisa, are you there?
Sorry, I'm here now. Sorry about that. And so giving to foundations decreased, we know, by 10.1% in current dollars between 2014 and 2015. And then between 2015 and 2016, giving to foundations increased 3.1%. So that's kind of a, you know, down quite a bit and up a little bit, which made the two-year aggregate change in giving to foundations really decrease year over year, or on the aggregate 2 years across the country by 7.4%. And so that tracks with what SCCF has seen. However, that's only when including exceptional gifts. So we're really fortunate to be, you know, sometimes the recipient of extremely large gifts of $500 million, $1 billion, $1.5 billion. And so when we include those exceptional gifts, which we refer to as any gift over 25 million, we do see our trends tracking and the foundation numbers across the country. However, when we exclude those exceptional gifts, we actually saw a large growth here at SCCF year over year, with the percent change in donations increasing between 2014 and 15, as well as 2015 and 2016. So I would say that the change between 2014 and 15 was larger. It was a slightly smaller change between 2015 and 2016, but we are seeing growth year over year here at SCCF.
Lisa, a follow-up to you. With individual giving, there's 72%, but how many of your donors are actually alive and people can go see them as individuals?
Sorry, would you mind repeating that?
Well, a lot of times we say it's not only the individual giving, but the individuals who have foundations or advised funds, that you can actually see them personally. So I imagine you've got a pretty big representation of people you can go visit.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're working with donors who are giving really actively. So the fundraising numbers that I'm sharing include contributions into existing funds as well as the establishment of new funds. Generally, those very exceptional gifts are the first-time gifts from a donor to SCCF, but we are seeing growth both to existing funds and in the number of new funds created year over year.
Great. So Joe, tell us more in depth about your numbers. You mentioned corporate giving was up a lot.
Yeah, so corporate giving for City of Hope, we were up almost 40% between 2015 and 2016. Now that, because of our industry groups, that reflects more nationwide fundraising than just California. Like I said, you've got Home Depot based in Georgia, or, in our office supply, you've got Staples in Massachusetts and Office Depot, I think, in Minnesota. So that's from some of our national fundraising. So that was up almost 40%. Gifts from individuals was up 12%. So we saw a significant increase in that as well. Now in our numbers there, we also include family foundations. So those where, kind of like you just said, we're talking to individuals, though the vehicle for their gift may be their family foundation. So overall, our numbers were up about 14%. I know that our goal for 2017 is growth of another 13%. We're really pushing pretty aggressively, I've got to say. I mean, we're hiring people, we're expanding our base of fundraisers. So we're betting on the continued growth of the fundraising in California and around the country. California is our primary market. Our catchment area is Los Angeles County, even down into Orange County, and out into the Inland Empire. But yeah, I mean, we're anticipating increased growth in our fundraising and in our donor base.
You mentioned earlier your growth in $1 million plus gifts. Talk about that a minute.
Yeah. So for people who read through, or when you're looking through the California report, there's a line in there about how gifts of $1 million or more have, and I think the quote was, shrunk to almost non-existence. In 2015, we had 8 gifts of $1 million or more for a total of $45 million. In 2016, we had 18 gifts of $1 million or more, totaling $56.5 million. So we're seeing the opposite from what is in the Giving USA report or the California report, in that we're seeing an increase in large gifts. Now, I think that one of the things for City of Hope is that we have a donor database that tends to skew older in terms of age. And cancer is a disease of aging. And so as people get older and as people live longer, they are more likely to get cancer and more likely to become a patient of City of Hope and other comprehensive cancer centers around the country. So with an increasing patient population, you're going to naturally increase the number of people who are very, very grateful to you for saving their lives and have the wealth to make those kind of gifts. So for 2017, I think that I haven't seen all the numbers, but I think we are on pace to surpass the 18 gifts from 2016.
Excellent. And Lauren, you were talking earlier about the growth. Certainly it's been better over all the year, but also what happened after the election.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of growth that's happened, I think really last year in particular, and then certainly at the end of the year after the election. So for example, we have tripled our monthly donor program in the last 6 months to 90,000 monthly donors, which is just significant and huge, and results in money that we can budget on and count on in years to come in terms of support for Sierra Club. I would say that we're also seeing like I said, we saw an 8% growth in major donor fundraising between 2015 and 2016. We lump our foundations and family foundations together in our database. So I would say that most of that growth we saw really was directed by individuals, whether they're giving through, by themselves or through a family foundation. And then low dollar fundraising was up 21.5%. So that was all individual donation driven, which is pretty significant. At the same time, I think we've seen the foundation sector really kind of wake up to this issue around the environment, in particular around climate change. So folks like Bloomberg Philanthropies have obviously been leading in this space for some time, but MacArthur Foundation in 2015 made a $50 million pledge to support 9 nonprofits, including the Sierra Club, around efforts to build leadership capacity and political consensus around climate issues. So that is kind of a big shift, and we're hearing from more and more of our institutional funders a willingness to explore this type of philanthropy. So that's been great. In terms of the $1 million giving, I just wanted to say that we've also seen an uptick in 7-figure support. So we had a 10% increase in this category from 2015 to 2016. And this year we've received several unbudgeted 7-figure contributions, all of which were from California donors. All of them are individual. And a majority of those gifts were made as unrestricted contributions, which I thought was quite significant and sort of speaks to, I think, the response to the election. Environmental donors in California, especially those who've been motivated by the election, are concerned with the current state of affairs in Washington and the environmental policies coming out of the Trump administration, but they're also looking to fund solutions. And so they see California as an example of what we can do at the state level when the federal government is sort of not willing to work on a productive environmental agenda. So these donors are coming into the fray, making large gifts and making unrestricted gifts so that they can leave the organization with that most flexibility to invest these resources where they'll be most effective.
You know, Lauren, it's interesting. I think Giving Institute was talking about this in terms of rage giving, and that's certainly, I would imagine, many of your donors, what you're experiencing there. But I'm kind of curious if any of our other panelists, like Lisa or Joe, have you seen any change in giving patterns as post-election?
This is Lisa, and we certainly have. I don't have hard data to share, but I've spoken with a number of our philanthropy advisors here at SPCF, who are the individuals who serve our individual donors and their families, and they've told me that since the election, they really have seen a renewed interest, and sometimes a first-time interest, in recommending grants out of their donor advised funds to organizations like the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, the Anti-Defamation League, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. So a lot of activity and interest there from our donors. We also, we host a large event each year. We call it our annual regional meeting, where we talk about, the most important issues that are affecting our region. And this October, we'll be inviting Anthony Romero, the executive director of the ACLU, as well as Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of Anti-Defamation League. And we've just recently released the opportunity to register for that event and have had unprecedented early registrations. So it seems like, many of these issues are things that matter to our donors, and we're seeing, in some cases, some first-time kind of activism through their philanthropy.
Are you seeing something similar that Lauren was seeing with the $1 million plus unrestricted type gifts?
Yeah, so the $1 million plus gifts for us, we receive a sizable number of those each year. In 2014, we had 122 gifts of $1 million or more. A big jump, actually, between 2014 and 2015 by about 25%, up to 153 gifts over $1 million that year. And then we're slightly down in 2016, so just 127 gifts. So we tend to ride a little bit of a roller coaster. It's sometimes hard with significant dollar numbers coming in that kind of like you were talking about earlier about the bequests and how big shifts can happen based on some really exceptional gifts. That is something that affects us as well. But we certainly do see many folks who are interested in making a large gift to a donor advised fund, and then taking their time as an individual to make those grant recommendations out, taking a year or 2 years, maybe 3 years to give some thought around how to be strategic with their philanthropy and get the grant recommendations out the door.
So Joe, I'm sure it's probably not rage giving into healthcare, but do you think the whole conversations around Obamacare in any way has changed the way people are giving in healthcare?
Well, I think that it's not directly tied to Obamacare. So I think that there's a couple of things. One, with Obamacare, what you're seeing in healthcare in general is really two primary reactions. One, there's a lot of consolidation of care. So what City of Hope has been doing and other organizations have been doing is we have been absorbing community medical practices. So to expand our reach, and at the same time as the consolidation of care, some of that's in response to the narrowing of insurance networks. So many of us have probably experienced this, where our insurance company will no longer pay for someplace, certain places that they paid for before. So by going out and absorbing the community practices that may take some of those other insurances and that the other insurance companies would pay for, you're able to sort of expand who your payers are from an insurance point of view. I think that's going to continue because I think it's something that has started and is gaining momentum now. And so you're going to see a lot of consolidation. Like I said, hospitals going out and either setting up community clinics, purchasing community practices. The other thing that in terms of, so for City of Hope, it's not just healthcare, it's also scientific research. And let me put this in context a little bit. When researchers go to, say, the National Institutes of Health for grant funding, they might spend dozens or hundreds of hours over 3 months writing a grant proposal that's going to be peer reviewed and picked apart by people who are other scientists. They may or may not know about this researcher's work. But even so, if you went back 20 years ago, what happens is when researchers apply to the NIH for grant funding, all those, after it goes through the peer review, they're all given scores. And about 20 years ago, if you scored in the top 25%, you received funding. Today, it's the top 7% that receive funding. So the analogy I like to make is go back to your college days and you're taking a class, pass-fail, and you score 92 out of 100 in the class, and that's a fail. Because what happens is if you're in that top 7%, you get funded, but if you're in that 8%, you don't get funding. So now go to today in the current political climate where there is talk of reducing funding to the National Institutes of Health. And for medical research, we're trying to use that both with our physicians and with our donors. So with the physicians, what we do, with the researchers, what we do is we present to them, hey, look, you could spend 3 months writing that grant proposal, or you can come have lunch with this individual with me, and we might be able to get similar funding. With the donors, we're able to use that, both of those facts, sort of the context of lower NIH funding and the possibility of even greater reduced numbers in NIH funding, to talk to them about the opportunity. Without private philanthropy, a lot of this medical research simply cannot go on. And so, because the other thing is the government looks for specific types of research that they want to fund, and really what that's going to be is the kinds that are going to produce the most papers and the most, so that the government can show, look, we funded this and all these papers were produced. Some places, in City of Hope in particular, we want patients to get better. So that may not, we may want like a high risk, high reward potential new drug that the NIH won't fund because of the high risk, but a private philanthropist could get involved and fund there. So I think in terms of the political climate, that's what what we're seeing and how it's affecting us at City of Hope.
This is Tom. A question to all of you about bequests. And we talked about the roller coaster of bequests. The Giving USA bequest number is cash that comes through that's monitored. So can you reflect not only the cash from bequests, but your bequest expectancies at your organizations? Lauren, let's start with you.
Well, yeah, we saw an uptick in bequests, both in expectancies and revenue in 2016. In fact, we had a 8-figure bequest donation come in that really kind of skewed our overall revenue numbers in the positive direction. So that sort of different than what we saw in the Giving USA report. But as you mentioned, you know, it can be kind of all over the place. But as of right now, we're sort of looking at meeting our revenue expectations for bequests, at least at the kind of mid-year or near mid-year mark in terms of our reflections.
Lisa, what about you in your area?
Sure. So bequests are not a big focus area for us. I think that we offer some funds and vehicles that allow donors to be more creative. So we're not generally making a big push for a donor to make an outright request to Silicon Valley Community Fund, bequest to Silicon Valley Community Foundation. But we do see very commonly and growing interest in vehicles like our designated funds, where a donor can designate a specific organization to receive money in the future, as well as field of interest funds, where a donor can name a field they're interested in. That can be very specific. It could be, you know, upon my passing, I'd like my funds to support the best organizations working in girls STEM after-school programs in East San Jose, and they trust our team to 10, 20, 30 years from now utilize their funds to support whatever organizations are doing great work in those fields. And so we do see renewed interest in folks utilizing those kinds of vehicles, and even working with us to place on files letters of intent to transition their donor advised funds into a designated fund or a field of interest fund, rather than naming successor advisors to their fund. So certainly seeing interest in creative ways of giving beyond their passing, but outright requests are something that are not a big focus for us.
And that makes sense. You've got a younger set of donors there. Joe, you said your donors are a little bit older. Speak to bequests and expectancies.
Yeah, so between 2015 and 2016, and we do include other planned gifts, charitable remainder trusts, gift annuities, things like that in with bequests, but the total from 2015 to 2016 almost doubled. It grew by 87%. Again, we do have an older skewing database. We've made a big push over the last couple of years in terms of your expectancy question to try to go out to our database and simply ask them, are we in your will already? If so, do you mind sharing with us how much? City of Hope's been around for 100 years, and people have been giving to it for generations. We get lots of bequests that we did not know existed until they come into us. And so it's really kind of difficult for us to plan for it. Again, we've tried to go out over the last couple of years and survey our donors to see if we can get a better handle on that. We've also strategically started to try to use bequests more when we go out to talk to major gift donors, and the idea of a blended gift and allowing them to do even more than they thought they could do just with current income, with gifts of assets in their estates. So that's also how we're kind of trying to use it strategically as well.
Lauren, I was wondering if we could circle back on this conversation of donor advised funds. I know, Lisa, you're at ground zero of donor advised funds, but are you seeing an uptick, Lauren, in how many gifts you're getting from the donor advised funds, and are you any special strategies you're using to cultivate those people who give through donor advised funds?
Yeah, we are seeing an uptick in giving. So from 2015 to 2016, we had a 46% increase in the number of gifts that came in through DAFs and a 65% increase in revenue from DAFs. So it's growing pretty significantly. I have been working quite heavily with my team last year and into this year about focusing them on conversations around gifts of assets and donor-advised funds to kind of have a more pointed conversation with our donors about where their money resides, how they like to do their philanthropy, and how we might be able to build a strategy by which they can make a more significant, more transformational type of gift. So asking more discovery type questions about whether or not they have a donor advised fund, how much do they have in it, are they planning to spend it down or keep it and hand it off to their kids, so kind of getting a sense of their philanthropic culture as a donor, as a family of donors, to help inform kind of the strategy for solicitation.
Joe, what about you?
Unfortunately, I don't have a ton to add to this. I don't have the figures in terms of donor advised funds as to what it was year over year. And really, our strategy is very similar to what Lauren just said, too, to talk to our donors about what their different assets are, where their money is, how they like to give, and how we can help them make more transformative gifts using combinations of all of those vehicles.
So Lisa,
question.
Go ahead, Tom.
No, go ahead, Craig.
No, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask each of you, what are you hearing from your colleagues, both within your organization, but others you run into in the community as you're talking fundraising, talking shop? What are you sensing from the larger group outside your organization? And Lauren, if you could tackle that.
Well, sure. I mean, I think certainly in the environmental community and talking with allied organizations working in this space, whether they're fundraisers or not, the kind of pulling out of the Paris climate deal really galvanized people, and so you're seeing a huge increase in attention and support toward this issue. So that's been true across the sector, you know, at organizations similar to Sierra Club, and it's true for our own organization. And then again, I think the kind of rage giving that happened outside of the election, you know, we experienced that. You know, I've talked to the folks at ACLU and Planned Parenthood and other organizations in a similar space. And so we're trying to mitigate both how to funnel that money in the best way to make the most difference and to engage and keep those folks engaged for the long term. Because I think what we're seeing with a lot of those donors is not just, I mean, the gift was the first piece of wanting to make a difference, but there are also other ways they're looking to make differences, and so it's up to the organization to figure out a way to engage those folks beyond just a renewal solicitation. And so I think my colleagues at various other organizations are really thinking critically about how do we do that in an authentic way that builds strong relationships with our donors and our volunteer community.
And if I can
Lisa,
speak, following on to that about continuing a little bit with the rage giving, we've seen renewed interest from our donor advised fund holders in supporting the work that we do with our discretionary dollars around a few strategic areas, especially around our immigration work. We had an unprecedented number of SCCF donors choose to volunteer at an event we hosted, a Citizenship Day workshop with the San Jose City College. On that day, about 1,400 immigrants were able to work with legal counsel and with our volunteers to complete citizenship applications and, you know, continue on the path towards becoming a citizen. So we're seeing tremendous interest in some of these issues that are, you know, in the news these days. And we've also recently started a series of podcasts, and one of our top downloaded podcasts is about immigration issues that have happened lately. So certainly seeing you know, interest in moving philanthropic dollars and spending time and bringing families together to volunteer at events that are helping to you know, further these issues that are bubbling up in the news now more than ever.
And what are you sensing from the other community foundation people that you talk to at some of your conferences?
Yeah, so I have been in touch with a number of colleagues across the community foundation world. A couple of months ago, I attended the Advancement Network Conference, or ADNET, which is a group sort of like Association of Fundraising Professionals, but specifically for community foundation fundraisers and donor services staff. And, you know, a lot of what we've talked about resonated with those individuals. I think that conference took place, you know, shortly after the inauguration. You know, uncertainty around tax issues in the future was a large topic of conversation. Interest, kind of renewed interest or first-time interest in sort of human rights issues and immigration and other things were really bubbling to the surface for my other community foundation colleagues.
Excellent. And Joe, what about you in healthcare? You mentioned some of this consolidation. So what outside the City of Hope are you hearing in healthcare?
Well, so back in April, kind of following up a little of what Lisa said, we had the National Association of Cancer Center Development Officer Conference. That's the comprehensive cancer centers, not just comprehensive cancer centers, but people who are specifically working in the cancer area. And that brought people together nationally, and there's an annual benchmarking study. Fundraising continues to increase, specifically in the cancer area. Again, I think we are seeing, as the country comes out of the recession, I think we're seeing a lot more people who are starting to get more involved in the medical philanthropy. You know, in California, yeah, there's a lot of talk among healthcare fundraisers about the consolidation. There's a lot of concern, frankly, about people's jobs as the consolidation comes in, and what that is. Now, I would say at City of Hope, in particular, we're being aggressive in hiring, and I would hope that other organizations are doing the same thing so that they can continue to grow their fundraising. But, you know, we're seeing it in Los Angeles, USC, UCLA, UC Irvine. You're starting to see everybody with more community practices popping up, going to areas that are underserved traditionally. We found, for example, in the Antelope Valley, or no, well, yes, the Antelope Valley in specific, but in general, if people have to drive more than an hour to get their care, they actually don't go to get care, and they'll go to someplace else closer that may not provide the same quality of care. So it's very important for the hospitals, if we're going to all reach more and more patients, to go to them and not expect them to come to us.
And if I can share about health-related grant making out of Silicon Valley Community Foundation's Donor Advised Funds, I was kind of surprised to learn that there is a really significant portion of our grant-making dollars from Donor Advised Funds going out the door to health-related nonprofits. In 2015, it was 14% of all of the grants made, and in 2016, it was 44% of grants made because of a couple of significant grants. So we're seeing significant interest from our donor advised fund holders in health-related organizations. We've recently added to our website a database where anyone can go and search where dollars are going from SCCS out into the community. You can sort by cause area, sort by geography. So I used that tool to find this information, and was really excited to see that healthcare is certainly of interest to our donor community.
Sarah, do we have any questions from the audience? Tom, you want to tee up another one, and while Sarah gets some of the ones from the audience?
Sure. Let's go back to donor advised on a second. Fidelity, these others, do they have different donor restrictions in terms of distributing money than community foundations and philanthropic foundations? Any of you react on that? Should we change that attitude so they're forced to give more money away?
I can speak for Silicon Valley Community Foundation that we see a payout rate from our donor advised funds. I believe these numbers are similar for Fidelity as well, of 16 to 20% annually. And so we really see money in and money out. We have policies and procedures around reaching out to donors if no activity happens within a donor advised fund over a period of 2 years. So we think these vehicles are wonderful and flexible and are a great way of mobilizing charitable dollars. So we're seeing great increase year over year of dollars in as well as dollars out.
Wow, that's a great percentage. I was not aware of that. Joe, Lauren, any comments on that?
Well, I would jump in with a bit of a different take in that I don't know how much we should be putting. We should need to put restrictions on some of the or minimums or floors on the percentages that they give out. This really is the work of, and I think Lauren spoke to this, getting out and having conversations with the donors. Knowing that the money is there, I would put it back on us as gift officers, as fundraisers, to go get it, and having those conversations, those deep conversations with donors. We all know, and it's been happening for many, many years, gone are sort of the days where people just write you a check, Lauren, Sierra Club notwithstanding in terms of the current political requirement, but where they don't want to know what's going on with the money. You don't need to show them how the money is really an investment that they're making in this cause. And I think the more we do that, then we know to use all of the vehicles at our disposal, including donor advised funds, to get those gifts and really connect the donors with a cause that they're passionate about, that they want to make a huge difference in.
I'd like to go back to one of the slides that Tom showed about volunteerism. And, we hear so much about the younger generation wanting to be much more involved with the organizations that they're giving to. And I'm curious, Lisa, starting with you, because you probably have the youngest constituency, but what is the foundation needed to do to really connect to some of those younger donors, and what kind of volunteer opportunities are you able to provide?
Yeah, so we're seeing many younger donors working with us. Really, that's often because here in Silicon Valley, some of our wealthiest and youngest are illiquid asset rich, but not really flush with cash. And so we are uniquely able to accept gifts of complex assets, including closely held or restricted or pre-IPO stock. So our goal is to work with young entrepreneurs and their families to accept gifts that may be worth nothing right now, but hopefully will be worth something very soon, to allow them to fund a donor advised fund with significant pre-IPO assets, a little bit of cash too, so they can get started with their grant making right away and getting their families involved in that grant making. And then ideally, upon a significant liquidation event, a merger or an IPO, the younger donors and entrepreneurs would have a little bit of a head start in thinking about their philanthropy in a strategic way. And our goal is then to continue to serve them and their families for years to come.
So Lauren, what about you? What has the Sierra Club been able to do to connect not just to younger donors, but also just to provide volunteer opportunities?
Well, I mean, we do a lot. So we're one of the few organizations, I think, that has the infrastructure in place already to absorb a lot of this certainly this newfound interest. But because we have chapters in every single state, and then below those chapters, we have kind of formal volunteer groups who associate and work around various issues in their local communities. There are places in which folks who want to get involved can, and there are actual physical spaces they can go to do that. We also have programs that we run on college campuses in order to engage young college students in the fight around climate change and a push towards clean energy solutions. So there are programs that we're running on that front, and we're looking to expand, and we're looking to think about ways to broaden our membership base so that it's more reflective of the kind of face of America today. So thinking about ways to diversify, to attract more young folks into this work and meet them where they are, as opposed to telling them what Sierra Club is about and having, assuming that they're going to come with us. So we really are thinking strategically about ways to kind of engage those audiences authentically, as opposed to just, saying stuff and waiting for them to show up. And then on the same front, just to kind of piggyback on what Lisa said, I think, a lot of folks who work in Bay Area fundraising hear a lot about, Silicon Valley and all of the millionaires and billionaires who have come out of the tech industry. And while that's true, many of them, as Lisa noted, have, a lot of assets that aren't liquid. But we are working with a lot of those folks who have made some significant wealth, and they're just figuring out how to be philanthropists. They're trying to figure out what's important to me, what are the causes that I care about, how do I want to make a difference, am I the kind of person that just wants to write checks, am I the kind of person that likes to be more hands-on and involved? And so having those conversations with those donors right now as they're in their 40s and kind of really just kind of beginning their philanthropic careers, we believe it'll help to kind of set up a longer, more robust relationship over the long term. And that's really translated into one of those 7-figure gifts that I mentioned we received this year, which actually came through a donor-advised fund from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. But we've been working with that donor on an individual basis. So it's all sort of interconnected.
Got it. And so, Joe, you have a much older skewing constituency. Do you find volunteerism important and part of the cultivation process of your donors?
We do. It's a little tougher for us because we don't have a huge infrastructure for volunteers. We tend to have more volunteers than we have things for them to do, particularly around the hospital. So for us, it's really trying to get people involved in advisory kind of committees around the hospital in various departments, and offering them those opportunities to get involved. Frankly, most of our giving is driven by conversations with the researchers and our donors feeling like they are really partnering with the researcher, that they're providing the funding and the researchers doing the work, and continually updating the donors. Volunteerism, in sort of the way in particular that Lauren described it, is not a huge driver for us.
Got it. So I think, Sarah, you have a question from the audience? Sarah, you said you had a question for the audience, so tee it up.
I'm so sorry, I was muted. We had a question from an audience member that would like to request the panelists to talk a little bit more about direct mailing and online giving trends.
Joe, I think you were talking.
Go
ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I'll just say that my counterpart, who actually runs our membership and direct mail program, can speak to this with more efficacy, but we've seen significant increases in both direct mail and in particular online fundraising. So a lot of the folks that came in to the organization and who helped with that tripling of our monthly donor program signed up to be monthly donors online, and we did a pretty extensive push after the election to drive folks towards monthly donations. And it's an easier thing to do, obviously, online, because you can pivot quite quickly and set up a campaign as opposed to kind of redo your whole mail program. But we really, kind of, those two things work in tandem, and it's been a big part of the growth that we've seen both in our member base, which has grown, I think, something like 83%, and then our monthly donors.
Joe, you were talking about that with us before the webinar started. Do you want to share what's going on at City of Hope?
Yeah, the direct mail for us between 2015 and 2016 increased by 14%. And then I know for some of the numbers now, we're seeing our retention rates increasing, and the annual amount of giving per donor. I think we're seeing about 1.4 gifts per donor annually, and somewhere up around $100 per donor being given annually. Our online giving, we've really made a bigger push in the last 3 years, so we have seen tremendous increases in that. Some of that's because we're just getting into it. And it goes back, I think, a little bit maybe to what sort of a different form, not of volunteering, sort of volunteering, that people who can't necessarily make gifts themselves or large gifts themselves to fund research are willing to go out and go online and set up fundraising pages and ask, do the peer-to-peer fundraising and their friends and their family to raise money in support of a researcher. And we're seeing tremendous increases in that as well.
So Lisa, how much of a factor is direct mail or online giving to the Silicon Valley Community Foundation?
Certainly, we hear from our donors, hey, I just got an email from XYZ organization. When's the last time I gave to them? Let's do another grant. So that's something that definitely drives donors to think about their grant recommendations. But it's something that we don't employ ourselves to, to bring in donors to us. It's really more for us about, referrals from donors we're currently working with, or referrals from a professional advisor community of their clients to us.
Okay.
This is Tom. What about a follow-up in social media for each of you? Not so much asking for money, but using social media as a tool.
Yeah, this is Joe. Definitely something that we have been increasing again through Facebook and Twitter, and redesigning our own websites. It's an entirely new world out there for those of us like myself who've been doing this for 25 years. In terms of going out and engaging people, and I think, as Lauren said before in reference to the Sierra Club, that you can't just deliver your message to people and hope they'll come along. You have to go out and meet them where they are. So yes, we now are using as many social media platforms as we can to communicate, whether they are research updates, community events, new ad campaigns, trying to also be as interactive as possible. When we send stuff out, we want something to try to drive that engagement. So even if it's a survey, or it's click here for the 3 best ways to protect yourself from skin cancer in the summer, those kind of things, to try to get some reaction.
I would, Lauren. Oh, sorry, Lisa. Go ahead.
Oh, I'll be quick. So I think, following up on what Joe said, I think the word engagement is really key for us. SCCF is very active on social media, and it really comes all the way from the top. Our CEO, Emmett Carson himself, is very active on Twitter, and encourages staff members to engage with our community through their own Twitter and Facebook. So we're really out there trying to build community and, actually respond to people who tweet at us or who make Facebook posts and bring them along. And as such, we've seen growth in both our followers and fans on Facebook over the last several years.
And I don't have a lot to add. We're doing the exact same thing. Social media is a huge part of our strategy, both to engage and communicate with our member and volunteer base. We have, accounts on all of the platforms for the organization, as well as our lead campaigners, our executive director, chapters have accounts. So there's a lot of different ways that we are communicating with our members and engaging them in our work and spreading the word about both good news when it happens and fights we're waging, and need them to join us in the fight.
We did have a question from the audience that asked whether there are any philanthropic segments receiving less funding since the election. And I think since this is 2016 data, most of what we would be able to provide is anecdotal. The stats that will come out next year in the Giving USA data should be able to answer that. So right at this point, I don't think we have a good answer for that.
And this is Sarah. I do have a question in terms of a link that Lisa mentioned. There was a request from the audience member if we could get access to that link on your website.
Absolutely, I can share that with you, Sarah.
That'd be great.
Here's a follow-up question on taxes. What do you think is going to happen with tax rules, and will that affect your donors, or are your people just going to give because they're energized these days?
This is Lauren. I don't really know yet. I mean, I think there are a lot of moving parts right now, and you hear a lot of rumblings about what's happening with the tax code, and so I think we're sort of waiting to see what the final rules will be. My sense is that while, in terms of kind of a recession giving, while we saw it went down when I was at Mother Jones, we actually didn't lose a ton of individual support, and folks really increased their giving around the recession. So I think there are times where donors are going to give because they're motivated by the cause rather than motivated by the tax benefit. That certainly factors in, and I don't want to discount it, but particularly on the kind of progressive organization side, there's definitely sort of a moral piece to their decision making that may outweigh financial benefit.
And I would say the same thing for healthcare. Particularly when you're looking at larger gifts, I don't know that people are always looking. They want to make a difference. They want to leave a legacy. They're not necessarily top of mind thinking about the tax codes, and there's just so much back and forth on it. It's almost, you'll paralyze yourself if you're waiting for a decision.
Yeah, and ditto, this is Lisa. We're really in a wait-and-see mode, but our donors are still very active in making gifts into their funds, and we have a lot of new prospects coming in. So we hope that will continue an upward trajectory, and we'll change course if and when we need to.
Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. If you would like to get a copy of the State of Philanthropy and Post-Recession California report, you can find it on our website at this address, and you can download it. We really appreciate your joining. If there's any other questions that do come to mind after this session, let us know, and we'd be happy to answer them via email. Thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.